the Middlesex 14th District. We have tonight the Democratic candidates who will be on the ballot on September 6th, the primary ballot. The only candidate in the Republican primary, Rod Cleaves, originally agreed to attend this session, but had a scheduling conflict and so will not be joining us. The forum is being brought to you as a collaboration between the League of Women Voters of the 4 towns served by the Middlesex 14th, Acton area, hosted by Lorelei Cooney, Chelmsford, hosted by Mary France, and I'm Nancy Confrey from Carlisle. This event is funded by a Scharfman grant from the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts Citizens Education Fund. Tonight we have both an in-house audience and a large Zoom audience as well. If you have questions that you would like to address to the candidates in the second portion of the forum, in-house, raise your hand, and we have runners who are posted in the back who will come and give you a card and a pencil. When you've written your card, hold it up and they will retrieve it from you. If you are on Zoom, use the Q&A feature. The chat feature for tonight should be used only for technical questions or problems. Finally, a couple of reminders for those in the audience tonight. The exits are clearly marked in the case of emergency. Hold all your applause or reactions to what the candidates say until the end of the forum. Make sure your cell phones are off. And there's no filming or picture taking. This is being both live streamed and recorded by Chelmsford TV and aired on all of the cable channels from the towns involved. The recorded version of this will be available on the League's websites, and I will remind you of that at the end. The League is the owner of this recording, and it can only be used in its entirety. I'd like to now hand over the evening to Nancy Brumback, who we're very fortunate to have as our moderator this evening. Nancy is a past president of the League of Women Voters Sudbury League, and she is the vice chair of the Massachusetts State League's legislation, the League of Women Voters State League's Legislation Committee.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Nancy. I will add my welcome to all of you who are here by email, and the League developed questions based in part on those. We are going to start tonight's program with those questions, and then we will switch to some time for questions that was submitted when people registered by Zoom for this event, as well as from those here in person tonight, and who are watching on Zoom and using the Q&A function to submit questions. There is, of course, never enough time to answer everyone's questions. So we encourage you to contact the candidates directly on their websites or Facebook pages if your question wasn't included, and ask them. We will now begin tonight's program with opening statements. And the first statement would be from Ms. Viviane Birchall. And Ms. Birchall, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Viviane Birchall, running for state rep for the 14th Middlesex District, and I'm so honored and pleased to be here tonight. First of all, I want to thank our hosts, the League of Women Voters in the 4 towns, and I want to thank you for the service you do to strengthen our democracy. I view this evening as a continuation of my work in our community. I have had the privilege of serving with the Land Use Department with the town of Acton, and right now as a ActonTV host and presenter and production person, but I also I volunteer with the Acton Memorial Library Foundation, with the Acton Boxborough United Way, and also a co-operator for Emerson Hospital. And I've also done anti-corruption work both in Uganda and in the state of Hawaii. And I have also done national planning in Uganda. I look forward to tonight's discussion and with my colleagues here.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Simon Cataldo, your opening statement, 1 minute.
I'm Simon Cataldo, a Democrat, running to be your next state representative. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and to everyone who's watching. It's now clear that the next battles to protect our rights, our planet, and our democracy will be waged in the state legislatures. The only questions are, will Massachusetts lead, and will we deliver effective representation to our residents? When I prosecuted Sheriff Joe Arpaio with the U.S. Justice Department, when I taught special education students in Harlem, and when I built Harlem Lacrosse into a national nonprofit, I learned the power of communities solving problems. And this is the community that I love. I was raised here, bar mitzvahed here, and graduated from our public schools. We're raising our children here, and I believe in this community's ability to deliver effective government through vigorous advocacy in the state legislature. I look forward to discussing the issues.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Pat Wojas, your opening statement. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. My name is Pat Wojas, and I am a candidate also for the 14th Middlesex District. I want to thank the three leagues for sponsoring this debate tonight, the Chelmsford League, the Concord Carlisle League, and the Acton Area League, and Chelmsford Telemedia for recording this and making it available to those four communities. I've been on the select board in Chelmsford for several terms. I still serve there now. And so I feel like I know the challenges that municipalities face in these times. And I feel I speak the language. When somebody talks about a specific Chapter 90 or Chapter 70 or Oppab, I know what they're talking about. So I feel like I can be responsive and be effective on the first day that I would start as a representative for this district. So I appreciate the other candidates being here, and I look forward to answering the questions that come before us. Thank you.
Thank you all, and now we'll get to those questions. The first one, the 14th Middlesex District covers 4 towns that each have their own issues and challenges. What is one area that you think where the 4 towns' needs vary most widely, or even compete in what they need from their state representative? How would you address these competing needs fairly? And we'll start with Ms. Wojas.
Thank you. I think probably the biggest area is budget relief, municipal budget relief. Each community has to use, I think, has to rely too much on residential real estate taxes. It's anywhere from, it's right around 80 to 86% in each community. And that's way too much. I think with Proposition 2.5, that's not going to be sustainable in the environment that we live in right now, where costs on everything are increasing dramatically. So I think the state needs to step in and help each community, some obviously more than others. But I would like to see, as inflation goes up and as wages go up, that means the state income tax that's received and collected also goes up. But it doesn't really do much for real estate taxes. If anything, it impacts negatively the homeowner. So I would like to see the state be a more fair arbiter and sharer of the revenues that they have.
Thank you. Ms. Birchall, do you need the question again?
Yes, please.
Let me give you an abbreviated version of it. How would you address the competing needs of different needs of the 4 towns in the district?
Right, so some of my experience was planning for a country, and we encountered a lot of this because when I look at the 14th Middlesex District, there are 4 towns, which means that I have the skills to identify the priorities across these 4 towns and identify the cross-cutting priorities, funding for them, and making sure that we allocate resources that can reduce wastage, and as a priority also identify the very specific issues that each town has and come up with groups that will really create ideation for those particular issues. So let's talk about education. when we look at the 4 towns, all of them have their different needs, but at the same time, they are struggling with funding. So Chapter 70, we're going to look at the budget, foundational budget, and that's how we'll take it forward.
Thank you.
And review.
Mr. Cataldo, do you need the question again?
No, thank you.
You're good.
Nancy.
Okay, thank you.
Our transportation needs in the 4 towns are really diverse. They've stopped the express service on the South Acton train stop, which is making it really hard for people who have been depending on that to commute to get to work on time. In Concord, we also rely on the MBTA, but we have other transportation needs, and we both struggle with the Rotary for different reasons, though. In Acton, it's a major economic issue along Great Road. In Carlisle, for some reason, they were labeled as an MBTA community, and no one can really figure out why. And here in Chelmsford, they've been struggling with their Chapter 90 funding, and if you drive on the roads in Chelmsford, you see how the state has not been a sufficient partner in that area. If you elect me, I will be working on all of these things: the Route 2 Rotary, the commuter rail, the Crosstown Connect, our Chapter 90 funding. We need to do all of them, and we need to do them now.
Thank you. The next question. Do you think Massachusetts should adopt same-day voter registration, where you can register and then vote the same day instead of having to do it 10 days before the election? Why or why not? And starting with Mr. Cataldo.
Yes, and let me tell you just about why I say that from the perspective of a candidate. So it's now late June. The campaign will really ramp up and people will really start to pay attention. Probably the time that people are going to be watching this video are in the 5 or 10 days before the election. But they can't register during those days in Massachusetts unless we have same or election day registration. So we really need to change our system to allow people to register as new voters at the time that people pay attention to elections. We want people to be engaging in our democracy to the maximum extent possible. Now, we are going to need to supplement funding for our town clerk's offices to make sure that they can actually realize the gains that we hope to see in voter participation. But that is a good investment, and it's one that we should make.
Thank you. Ms. Wojas.
I disagree with Simon on this one. I am not in favor of same-day registration. I am encouraged that the latest law that was put into effect recently did reduce the time before an election that you had to register from 20 days, now it is 10 days, and I think that maybe that could be made a little bit shorter even than 10 days. But I feel like with same-day registration, we hear so much about election fraud, and not that I think that it would encourage election fraud or anything like that, but I think anything we can do to reduce even the appearance of election fraud, I think we should make efforts to do that. So I would support cutting that time frame down to less than 10 days, but I would not favor same-day registration at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Birchall.
I will co-sign legislation that will support same-day registration anytime it comes to my desk. And with that said, in addition to having same day, I want us to strengthen voting access by translating the guidelines for participating in this democratic process in various languages so that everyone in our community can express their vote, can express their right to vote. And I mean, truth be told, the United States federally does not have a national language. So why can't we translate many of these laws into the languages that people speak in our communities?
Thank you. I just had one quick thought that I should note before we go any further. I just want to say for people who will be watching this closer to the election that this program is taped on June 30th. So anything that might happen in the news or in events after that could affect the answers will not affect the answers. So just so that you're aware, of where we are in the news cycle, because we're still 2 months out from the election. So June 30th is where we are right now. Question 3, what are your 2 or 3 priorities for the use of federal stimulus funding to best support the 14th district? And start with Ms. Birchall.
Healthcare, the stimulus to pay for our education as well. Our teachers were struggling during the pandemic, so they need a boost, and that stimulus should go toward that. And then our seniors are really struggling with isolation, so supporting senior services, supporting transportation access for everyone, and also providing incentives for small businesses to thrive. I think they're the part, they build our ecosystem, and they support our youth when they're looking for their first jobs or summer jobs. So that's where the money would go.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo.
Thanks, Nancy. The stimulus funds need to be applied to give relief to our working families who are struggling now and are going to continue to struggle given the immediate economic outlook. We need free lunches for all of our students in the district. Parents should not have to be choosing between getting new shoes or school supplies and giving their kids a healthy lunch every single day. So that's one thing that I'd focus on. I'd also focus on giving property tax relief to seniors in our community. We all know people who are getting priced out of our community. They deserve to age with dignity in the communities that they built, and that is becoming increasingly difficult to do, not just with property taxes, but the general cost of living due to inflation right now. So those are two things that I would focus on to make it bearable during these difficult economic times.
Thank you. And Ms. Wojas.
Thank you. As it happens, being a member of the Chelmsford Select Board, I was a part of the discussion on how to allocate the funds that Chelmsford did receive from the ARPA funding. And the main things that we focused on were, first of all, the HVAC in all the public buildings, because one of the things that we discovered from COVID is how outdated and ineffective the HVAC systems were. So almost every public building will now be upgraded to make them so much safer. The second item that we focused on was the food pantry, the local food bank, and what's called a Table of Plenty in Chelmsford that feeds hungry people once a week, and it's a wonderful program. And third is our health department, which had to so much expand what they were doing with the same number of resources. So we gave them additional resources to be able to do the contact tracing and the COVID tests and the COVID shots that they needed to implement. So those are the three main issues that Chelmsford used those funds for, and I fully supported those.
Thank you. Next question. Is there anything the Massachusetts legislature can and should do to address the rising cost of health care premiums? The rising cost of health care premiums. Start with Mr. Cataldo.
Yes, I'm in favor of single-payer health care. The best way that this was described to me is from a former executive at Emerson Hospital. He told me that our overhead costs for children and seniors are about a third of the people in the middle. But the people in the middle are the people who need the least health care. And the people who are young and old, we pretty much have a single-payer system for them now. So one of the main benefits of single-payer is that it helps with preventative care. Make those investments early, and we can help things from spiraling out of control. We also need better transparency on our prescription drug prices. That will help us to figure out where we are and rein in prescription prices, which we all know are rising and becoming out of control for many of us, especially those who are most vulnerable.
Thank you. Ms. Birchall.
I want to first start by saying I agree with Mr. Cataldo here about the single payer. I also support the single payer system, but in addition to that, as a co-operator for Emerson Hospital, which is our local hospital that provides care for all of us, there is more to healthcare than just the cost. There is also the accessibility and the interaction between the patients and the service providers. And as someone who's done cultural competence training for Emerson Hospital's perinatal unit, I say I would like to invest more into advanced education for our healthcare providers so that they can treat each and everyone in our community very accurately and have the best diagnosis for everyone to save lives.
Thank you. Ms. Wojas.
Thank you. I think we should allow more negotiation between the patient, not the patient themselves, but the patient advocates and the insurance companies. similar to the way Medicare negotiates prices. You know, they have a fixed rate that is the maximum that they can charge for each operation or each visit that somebody makes to a hospital or a doctor's office. And it seems just totally unfair to me that somebody going for the same exact procedure sometimes has to pay 3-4 times as much. I think we should allow so that type of negotiation. And as Simon mentioned, as far as prescription drugs, we also should encourage and allow more negotiation with those providers to allow the patient not to have to spend so much out of pocket.
Thank you. Next question. Do you think there is a climate crisis? And if so, what are 2 specific priorities the legislature should pursue to address it in Massachusetts? So climate crisis, 2 specific priorities. Ms. Birchall.
We all understand, and appreciate the crisis, but as somebody who's worked in the state of Hawaii, that prioritizes the protection of our environment, I want to introduce, one of my first duties in the State House, the implementation of environmental courts, because there are only 2 states in the United States that have environmental courts. That is Hawaii and Vermont. And when we do that, we hold polluters accountable, and also we discourage other possible polluters. In addition to that, just make sure that all our buildings in our local governments are retrofitted, and also the new buildings have a mandate to be fully electric, and that's how, and also transportation, electrify all transportation, because the carbon emissions from transportations are high.
Thank you. Ms. Wojas.
There are so many things I think we could do to help reduce the impacts of climate change, and climate change is absolutely an issue that is going to have to be addressed. Some things that are done locally, I know in the town of Chelmsford, is the motor pool now consists entirely of hybrid and electric vehicles. I think that's a good first step. I think we need to do some other, take advantage of some of the other things that some of the communities are doing, such as banning single-use plastic bags and styrofoam. There's many other things like that we can do. As they say, think globally and act locally. I think if we start to do some of these things on a wider scale, it's a statewide scale rather than just individual communities, eventually we'll make a difference, and we definitely need to make a difference sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo.
Like many of you, I woke up in August, looked out my window, and saw air that was the color blue from forest fires out west in Concord. Do we have a climate crisis? Yes. And I worried about bringing my kids outside, wondering if it was safe for them to breathe the air. When I did my senior thesis on the thermodynamics of residential energy in 2008, we already had the building and construction technology to make all of our buildings sealed up in electric safely. And we're still not there. We need a moratorium and a ban on new fossil fuel dependent infrastructure in Massachusetts. That should have been done. We've passed home rule amendments in 2 of our towns, and they haven't gone through the legislature. If you elect me, I will push those through the legislature, and I will work on a statewide ban. We also need to massively expand the amount of offshore wind, and that we're using. We have enough for 50% of all of our energy use, and we need to fortify our electric grid to push that energy through to our homes, our buildings, and our transportation system.
Thank you. The next question. As housing prices have skyrocketed, developers have continued to build large houses and luxury condos. Should the state encourage more housing production affordable to those in middle-range incomes? If so, what legislation might accomplish that? And start with Ms. Wojas.
Thank you. I think there's a few things that can be done to encourage more market rate and even low-income housing in the state. One thing that has been implemented is to change for town meetings, which each of the communities that would be representing still have a town meeting versus a city council. The town meeting vote only needs to be a majority rather than a supermajority when you make a zoning change, and I think that definitely will help to get more more changes made and allow more housing. As far as low-income housing, the so-called Chapter 40 rule that requires 10% of the housing in each community to be low income, I think should be enhanced. We should encourage that in every community, given that we be sure that the projects fit the character of each community. We don't want to have them, pigeonholed into a particular area or part of the town, but they need to be available, and we need more of that.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo.
The answer to the question, in my view, is yes. It is universally accepted that we have a housing crisis in Massachusetts, and it's particularly acute in our communities. The question is, what do we do about it? Well, we need to have more affordable housing, and we need to make our existing housing stock more affordable. We have a lot of large homes that can be subdivided, and we need to work in the legislature to make that happen so that we can have multi-unit housing and multi-generational housing in our communities. Where we do build new housing, it has to be near public transportation centers, because our housing crisis is also a transportation and a climate crisis. And we need to make sure that whatever units are being applied for the benefit of people with lower incomes have access to the clean energy that we're creating on an ongoing basis in our district.
And Ms. Birchall on housing.
Yeah, housing requires a multi-pronged approach. As somebody who worked in the planning and building departments in the town of Acton, I have seen the complexities of creating affordable housing. I've talked to developers, I have talked to commissioners, and one thing that I can suggest that I would want to do is revisit the grandfathered property, because it affects the zoning. You know, we're talking about wanting to increase it, to maybe put up subdivisions, but some grandfathered properties need to be revisited so that it can enable that. In addition, I support transit-oriented housing, the deeds exercise tax that could also boost housing in our communities. So, and also for those that are the housing that is already existing, can we retrofit and rehabilitate old structures so that we do not increase the footprint of housing, so that we balance open space with the needs for housing? Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is there any legislation that you think should address the issue of enabling women with children to participate fully in the workforce? Ms. Wojas.
I mean, I'm not aware of any current legislation. I think women absolutely should have every opportunity to participate completely in the workforce. I think what we've seen is from the pandemic is it's probably a lot easier to do than what we thought it might have been 3 or 4 years ago with the Zoom meetings and being able to work remotely, although that does also go the other way too. It sometimes requires more help in the home. I don't know of any specific legislation, but I would encourage employers, obviously, to do everything they can to keep their valuable women employees in the business and helping them, excuse me, advance in their careers. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Birchall.
Common Start Coalition, that's what first comes to my mind. That there is a group out there that is advocating for the Common Start, where children are given, there is funding for young children to be catered for. As someone who, even before the pandemic, was pushed out of the workforce, I understand the challenges of childcare. So I will support and sign on any legislation that will provide childcare for families, even for those running for office. I thank everyone who enabled that most recently. But also, in addition to that, we want to support organizations like Budget Buddies. Give you a shout out here in Chelmsford that is supporting women in our region who are trying to reintegrate back into the workforce and to manage property and to manage money. So I will continue doing that and introduce any legislation that will especially support the low and middle income families.
Mr. Cataldo.
I'm so happy to say that this legislation doesn't have to be introduced. It is in the legislature right now. The Common Start group has gotten a Common Start bill. It is there in committee, and it is excellent. It would eliminate child care costs for poor parents, and it would cap child care costs at 7% of family income. Think about that. That would enable our parents, our moms and dads, very frequently moms, to go back to work and find a job that pays more after taxes than the cost of putting just 1 or 2 kids into childcare. The question is, how do we get moms or young women with children, young children, back to work? We passed the Common Start legislation. I am proud to have the strong endorsement of the lead sponsor of that legislation, Ken Gordon from Bedford, and if I get in there, I will work hard with him to make sure that that gets passed expeditiously.
Thank you. This next question, if you watch the local news at night, you would think this is the defining issue for the state. Do you support a gas tax holiday? Why or why not? Start with Mr. Cataldo.
Yeah, a lot of people are hurting with many of their expenses relating to inflation, with gas, and a whole lot of other things. You know, when I started this campaign, I started to learn about some of the difficulties we're having with Chapter 90 funding in our towns, especially right here, the town we're in right now in Chelmsford. So what funds Chapter 90 funding? It's the gas tax. So let's not rob Peter to pay Paul, and in doing so also further entrench ourselves on our dependence of gas. Instead, there are other more targeted ways that we can provide the very needed relief in this difficult economic moment to our families. We can provide property tax relief to seniors. We can do one-time payments to people like nurses, our frontline workers, our teachers who are struggling right now. We can do free and reduced lunch. Those are the better and more targeted ways of helping people right now.
Thank you. Ms. Mojos.
I also agree that with Simon that gas tax relief or suspension is not the way to provide relief to the residents of this Commonwealth. It would not be. I don't think it would be effective. I don't know if there would be any way to keep the oil companies from keeping that as additional profit for one thing, and I don't think it would achieve the goal that it would be set out to achieve. I think a better way may be to have tax credits for lower income people, maybe based on the amount of gas that they use. But a gas tax suspension, I think, would just it wouldn't be effective, and I do not support it.
Thank you. Ms. Birchall.
I think this is a unanimous position for all of us. I agree with the 2 previous speakers that it's not the way to go.
Okay. The job of a new Massachusetts state representative is not easy. You have to learn how to represent approximately 40,000 constituents across 4 towns, each of which have their own opinions. You have to find your way around the State House, and that is not easy. And you have to come up to speed on legislation with little support. If you win in November, what is your plan for coming up to speed to become a state legislator? And we'll start with Ms. Birchall.
When I went on the first day, my first thing I want to do is introduce myself to every colleague of mine across the aisle, whether Democrats, Republicans, anything. And that way, we get to establish that relationship, and through that, get to learn everything that is happening through those conversations, and then prioritize to the issues that we as a representative of the 14th Middlesex, that the residents care about the most: education, healthcare, transportation, climate change, housing, and put together a team and like-minded colleagues to discuss together on how best to represent our towns. And most importantly, work with other legislators representing the same towns.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo.
My first job out of college was as a special education middle school teacher in Harlem's largest public school. And at 21 years old, I learned a really important lesson. When you walk into a new building, you lead with listening and humility. And that's how I'd start that job. And I'd start making relationships. I'd build social and political capital. I'd apply the values that we have in the district to the legislation that we're seeing in the committees and on the floor, and I'd work really hard. And then when I became a federal prosecutor, I got assigned to the biggest case that I could have ever imagined having, the prosecution of Sheriff Joe Arpaio. And I spent 3 days and nights in a row reading months and months of deposition testimony. Why? Because that's what my team needed. They needed me to become smart on that quickly. I'd find what my colleagues needed to get bills passed that would help our district, and I'd go and I'd do the work.
Thank you. Ms. Bojas.
Thank you. I have been a member since 2007 of the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. This is a regional planning agency based in Lowell, and there are 9 member communities. They're pretty diverse. They go from the city of Lowell, towns of Chelmsford, Dracut, Billerica, and the smaller communities like Dunstable and Pepperell. Even though it would seem that those communities would all have vastly different goals and objectives for how they want to move forward, pretty much everything that we discuss at the NEMCOG meetings is a unanimous vote. And I think the same can be said for the 4 communities in this district. Although there are vast differences as far as income and education, the bottom line is we all want the same things. So I would use the skills that I have developed in working with NEMCOG and with the municipal, as I mentioned in my opening, being on a select board with my municipal knowledge as far as getting up to speed on what's before the legislature at that time.
Thank you. Another sort of climate question. Do you think there should be a statewide ban on single-use plastic water bottles and plastic bags as a component of our approach to addressing environmental issues? Mr. Cataldo.
Yes.
All right. Ms. Birchall.
Yes, but I want to add that, I come from a country where these plastics were not regulated, and I've seen firsthand the negative impact of plastics. So that is why one of the reasons I support a ban. But I also want to add that I know how complex it is for small businesses, especially, because they think about a cost. And this is because I've been having these conversations in the community. And I understand that as much we want this, but we have to work with the small businesses, either by creating some fee structure for the people who are shopping to, offset that cost for the small businesses as well. So it's something that we can work out, but certainly yes for a ban.
And Ms. Wojos.
I have previously stated that I am in favor of a ban on single-use plastic bags. As far as plastic bottles, I think one of the most effective things that we ever did in Massachusetts was to have a deposit on soda cans. Now we should do that to these bottles. We should have a deposit on them, and you would see so much less trash along the streets with these soda bottles. So I would be more in favor of encouraging that and passing something like that, so that we could reduce the use of these and be able to reuse them many, many times.
Thank you. And now we'll go to the portion of our program that features questions that came in from you in the audience, from Zoom, and any other way that came in, over the transom maybe. So the first question from the floor. Many candidates make promises that they can't deliver on, often because the initiatives they promise are not popular with leadership in our legislature. How will you be effective in delivering on promises or legislation that leadership opposes? And we'll start with Ms. Birchall.
The people who will send me to the State House are doing so because they believe that I'm going to represent you. And I'm talking to you, my fellow residents of the 14th Middlesex. I will be answerable to you. I want to work for you. The State House has many different diverse people, diverse interests, but I cannot sleep well at night if there are people who do not have housing, who are struggling like me, who are struggling with rent, who are struggling with healthcare access, that I cannot sit back, and I will not let down. those values. That's a promise I can make.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo, leadership.
The leadership in the House is going to be tough. Everyone up here is going to be a freshman if we get elected. We're going to be new. In my experiences working in a large public school and working at the first Obama and then Trump Justice Departments doing difficult political corruption cases, you have to learn how to build social and political capital within an institution and then deploy it as quickly but as strategically as you possibly can. And so if you elect me, I will draw upon all of those experiences and deploy them for the benefit of our district. I think it's mostly a question of finding commonalities of interest and then using whatever political power you're able to develop when you're in the building for the benefit of our residents, because that's what this is all about. This job belongs to the people, and it's the people that need to be served by our next rep.
Ms. Wojos.
Thank you. I think that we have to understand that I would expect that most of the initiatives that we would be promoting in the legislature would be things that would be wanted across the entire Commonwealth. So obviously you'd work with others that feel the same way that you do. And sometimes I think if it does become something that's maybe over the top and is not favored by the leadership of the legislature, maybe you make incremental changes. And sometimes that's the way you get work done, is by making the smaller changes and then keep working on them until you do have that breakthrough. But absolutely, I would not burn any bridges. I would work as collaboratively as possible with the other members of the legislature to get the work done.
Thank you. The next two questions are on transportation, and the first one is very specific, and the second one is more general. So the very specific first question. The Concord Rotary is a sore spot in the area. What are your ideas for alleviating the safety issues and traffic issues without causing complications up and down Route 2? Start with Mr. Cataldo.
I've been in one traffic accident in my entire life, and it was in the Concord Rotary. And I have so many friends who have that exact same story. I was a kid, I was in my mom's minivan with my two little sisters, and we got rear-ended by a teenager who was driving a pickup truck. And it was because she was a new driver and didn't know where she was going, and that happens to so many people. It is dangerous, it is hurting our climate, and it is hurting our economy. Talk to any of the businesses along Great Road in Acton, and you will hear how the traffic that is stifling in that area of the town is hurting local businesses. So I think we need something that many residents of Concord opposed a couple decades ago. We need an overpass on the Route 2 Rotary, and now is the time to be talking about that, because we have $9 billion coming from the federal government in federal infrastructure funds. And I will work with the people of this district to draw those resources here and fix that problem.
Thank you. Ms. Birchall, Concord Rotary.
I also want to agree with the overpass as a really very realistic solution to the Rotary. But in addition to that, I want to reintroduce the need for this regional transit to reduce the amount of cars we have in the region. And you know, currently we have the Cross-South Connect in Acton. We have the Lowell Transit that supports this community, but we could expand those services. And once we do that, first of all, we are eliminating the carbon footprint from all the cars that we have in the area, but also we are providing affordable housing, transportation, housing on my mind, transportation to everyone in the community. So, and we need to expand parking for rail transit so people can.
Hold that thought, that's the second question.
Oh, okay.
Ms. Wojos, the Concord Rotary.
Thank you. I don't know that I know of any Rotary that's safe, even though supposedly a Rotary is supposed to be safer than having a four-way stop or whatever. You may know that in North Chelmsford, there used to be a Rotary there, and I had a couple fender benders there in my time. Now it's basically a square. It's no longer the Drumhill Rotary, it's the Drumhill Square, and at each intersection there is a traffic intersection, which I think makes it a lot safer. It might take you a little bit longer to get where you're going, to get around the areas that you wanted to go to before, but I think it's an effective way to manage that intersection, that area. Perhaps it is time for an overpass, as Simon mentioned, on Route 2, because there's always been the overpass there at Route 3, which is where the North Chelmsford, the Drum Hill Rotary was, and I think that is a valid solution.
Thank you. The other transportation question was ideas you have for interregional transportation or local transportation, things that we lack. So we start with Ms. Birchall.
Yeah, well, a continuation of the conversation on our public transit. I would love for us to update all the rail lines and make them electric. That's another way of combating climate change. Expand parking for rail transit because there is an increasing need for that, but also make the cost for rail transit cheaper so that, and where possible, based on income levels maybe, make it free for some communities, some families, so that they can go to and from work. And in addition, expand the hours and the frequencies for the rail transit so people don't miss schedules, don't miss their children's appointments and all that. So, and in terms of in-town transit and regional transit, create ride-share programs that are house-to-house. I know Chelmsford has a very great one with the seniors, but let's expand it so that we have house-to-house ride-share programs.
Thank you. Ms. Vojas.
Thank you. Yeah, we need to make rail transit much more effective and efficient. There's so many different ways that you can do that, and I agree with Viviane that the cost should be more needs-based so that lower-income residents don't have to pay as much to ride the rails and to not have to drive their cars every day. I know they do have reduced rates for some seniors, and unfortunately I'm at that age right now that I am able to take advantage of something like that, but it shouldn't be because of your age that you get to have a discount like that. It should be more based on your need. We need to have an easier way to get to the rail stations. It's great that we have the rail trail that is the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail that is expanded now, that goes by several locations that make it easier to hop on a bus or on a train, and I think those need to be expanded as much as possible, and if needed, to have parking lots, although to have to drive to the rail station kind of defeats part of the purpose, so if there's other ways to get there, that would be better.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo.
Our transportation challenges in our district are affecting so many aspects of our lives. It's affecting seniors' ability to get to their medical appointments reliably or on time. It's affecting people's ability to spend time with their children after work. We have some really good kind of incubator programs here in the district. Crosstown Connect is a really good example that started in Acton. We need to be expanding that and funding it. It's our next state rep's job to identify the things that are working in figuring out how to apply the state's resources to make sure that those programs flourish. But if you want to talk about big ideas, which we should, we need a North Station, South Station connector. Everyone here knows somebody who works in the seaport and has given up on the commuter rail and is now driving a gas-guzzling car to work because they can't get from North Station to the south side of Boston. There are so many of those people in Acton, Carlisle, in Concord, and probably some in Chelmsford. We need that, and we need to work for that.
Thank you. Next question from the audience here. The Fair Share Amendment that will be on the ballot in November earmarks funds for transportation and education. Do you support the idea of earmarking funds like that for specific purposes? And we'll start with Mr. Wojas.
I definitely favor that amendment. As far as earmarking for specific topics like transportation and education, I think those are two areas that we definitely need to put more funds into. So I would definitely favor earmarking those funds for those two areas of great need.
Mr. Cataldo.
Thanks, Nancy. I agree with Ms. Wojas. Those are two really high areas of need for our community. We think about the fact that Chelmsford has been punching above its weight for so long based on its Chapter 70 funding. You look at its per pupil funding and its teacher pay compared to the towns around here, and it's incredible the academic results and the quality of education that is being delivered here. But we cannot take that for granted. We need equitable Chapter 70 funding. So it's not just a question of will the Fair Share Amendment pass? I think it will. It's a question of what will our state rep do after that's done to draw resources to our public education system and to transportation projects in our district. One more note, we have 2 wonderful vocational education high schools that serve our district, and I would be working to get some of those funds applied towards those schools. Our Voc Tech schools are a huge part of our climate and economic future.
Thank you. Ms. Birchall.
I fully support the Fair Share Amendment, and yes, I also believe it's going to pass. And in addition to the Chapter 70 funding, which is problematic, even just for the level of the foundational budget, we are fortunate as Massachusetts. We have the Students' Opportunity Act, and it provides some funding, but we could expand that through maybe money from the Fair Share Amendment, but also using that money there is a plan that I distributed with all the school committee members in the district that was proposing maybe $100 bonus per student for at least the next 2 years to offset the costs that we incurred during the pandemic. So that's a great place to put it. But also, vocational institutions, funding for them, and also infrastructure, bicycle lanes. We need more of those and paths across the road so that people can walk to places and exercise.
Thank you. The next question, again from the audience, is here. Should the Commonwealth help towns meet Oppab, other post-employment benefits commitments for local governments? And start with Ms. Wojas.
Thank you for that question. That's a resounding yes for me. The state absolutely should take the lead on Oppab. It's basically the insurance benefits that are paid to retirees. Almost every community in the Commonwealth has a huge liability in this regard. In the town of Chelmsford, we started funding this obligation a few years ago. We're making progress on it, but it still will be decades before it's fully funded. And a lot of the retirees that take advantage of that, it's the community from which they retire that's responsible for it. And sometimes the community from which they retire, they may have worked 2 years where they worked 5 or 10 years in another community and then come here. So I think the state needs to kind of take over that and have some fairness to it so it doesn't adversely impact the community because somebody comes here to spend their last 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. Ms. Birchall.
I'm sorry, I did not hear the first part of the question.
The question is, should the Commonwealth help towns meet their Oppab, other post-employment benefits commitments for local governments?
Absolutely. As someone who works in local government here in our district, by the way, I fully support that, and I think it would. Every town employee, works so hard under sometimes difficult conditions. So I guess I'm fully in support of that.
Good. And Mr. Cataldo, Oppab benefits.
The question sounds arcane, but Oppab costs represent a grave threat to our municipalities' abilities to continue to provide basic services to our residents. So I agree that the state should be supplementing our town budgets to make sure that we can continue to pay Oppab costs. But we also need to look at what Oppab costs are. We need to increase transparency in prescription drug prices. We need to bring down the cost of healthcare to actually depress those the costs that are going to crush our municipalities unless we act quickly.
Okay. The next question, and again from somebody out there, so you can blame them. As a state representative, How will you respond, or would you respond, if you were there now, to the recent Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade? Start with Mr. Cataldo.
We're living in a moment where our children may have less rights to bodily autonomy and who they have relationships with than my generation and my mom and dad's generation. This is a scary moment for all of us standing here today on June 30th. But we should have known in December, when the Supreme Court denied a preliminary injunction against a plainly unconstitutional law, that this was coming. 15 red states had trigger laws, and they were ready. We need to not be reacting, we need to be acting and getting ahead of the game. That means making sure that there are serious and significant civil liability damages provisions against anybody who tries to hold accountable somebody who seeks or aids or gives an abortion in Massachusetts. We need to make sure that there is no extradition that happens of anybody from Massachusetts, and we need to be mindful that contraception is next, because there is no longer any legal basis for a right to contraception in the United States in the Constitution, according to the Supreme Court.
Ms. Bojas.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I too was devastated by this decision by the Supreme Court. I just never expected anything so archaic could possibly happen in the United States, but it did happen. So I favor the actions that the governor took and the legislature is putting forward to make Massachusetts a sanctuary state where somebody should feel welcome to come here to get the services they need and not have to fear that somebody's going to come after them, some bounty hunter is going to come after them and drag them back to their state and put them in jail. That's just totally unacceptable and just mind-boggling that could even happen in 2022. I mean, that's something from the 1700s, and it definitely should not happen.
Thank you. Ms. Birchall.
First of all, I want to thank the Senate yesterday, the House yesterday for passing legislation that expands the Roe Act. This is what we need to do going forward. This was a wake-up call, but you know, at the last anniversary of Roe v. Wade, I sent out an email to an email blast with the question, is this potentially going to be the last anniversary for Roe v. Wade? Little did I know that it was going to be the last anniversary. But this also it gives us the energy, the motivation to look at all the other rights that we've taken for granted. First of all, for those states that are deeply affected, I'm so fortunate to live in Massachusetts right now, and I'm saying I'm going to request the legislators to also make this a sanctuary state so that other people who need the service can get it, because sometimes that is abortion rights are what will make somebody safe. So I will protect reproductive rights with all my heart.
Thank you. The next question, how would you address food insecurities in our state? We'll start with Ms. Birchall on this one.
I'm fortunate to work as a volunteer on the board of the Acton Boxborough United Way. Addressing food insecurity is one of our key priorities. We serve about 10,000 meals a month. Just think about it, in part of our community. During the pandemic, we were providing food to 500 families, at any given time. This is a crisis. As someone who's worked in comprehensive planning, we look at indicators. We might be in affluent towns, but food insecurity is an indicator that we have a problem in our midst. As a priority, any extra funding I will get in my whatever means I can to make sure that people don't go hungry in my neighborhoods. It's unacceptable.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo, food insecurities.
Would you mind repeating the question?
Yes. How would you address food insecurity in our state?
Thank you. So as a state rep, I think that there are a few provisions that could address this issue, which is really flying under the radar and very significant in our district. I was at I was at the local food pantry here, and I think, Pat, you were there that day, several months ago, and we had about 250 cars pull up. And it was surprising and sad and also hopeful to see these people getting fed. We need free lunches for our children. Our children need free lunches. This is a major issue that's happening now. We also need to take advantage of the incredible local farms, local agriculture that we have in our district. We need to pay those farmers to give food to people who need it in our communities, and we need to remove the potential for civil liability for lawsuits against those farmers, which is one of the reasons that they struggle to give away food without fear of economic repercussions. So those are two laws that we could pass that would help.
Ms. Wojas, food insecurities.
Thank you. I mean, I agree with what the other two candidates have said. The food pantry, I know in Chelmsford, is well attended. I mean, and unfortunately, that's a sad thing. It shouldn't have to be. But they do, they're able to collect donations so that they can service so many people in the town of Chelmsford. And there's been a program in town that our social services director has encouraged called Grow a Row, where they encourage farmers. We have several local farm plots around the area where people have their own small garden plot, and we encourage people to grow a little extra food there and bring it to the food pantry so it can be distributed fresh. I mean, nobody likes fresh produce better than, everybody loves fresh produce. So we encourage that. There are ways that we can encourage restaurants and grocery stores to provide any extra they might have to these food pantries, and I think we need to continue that and expand it.
Thank you. One more question here. What state-level involvement, if any, would you recommend to support the integration of immigrants into our communities? And this one, we'll start with Ms. Birchall.
Well, quite appropriate. As a first-generation immigrant to the United States, it gives me so much joy to see all the organizations and legislators who are championing immigrant rights. I know how difficult it is to come and integrate in a community like this. But at the same time, I'm thankful for the opportunity. I'm running for state representative. That says a lot. So thank you, America. Thank you, 14th Middlesex, and everyone who signed the nomination papers. But what we can do to support immigrants, one, provide translation services to key and critical services that immigrants need. Two, Safe Communities Act so that they can really not be scared of going out of their homes. We thank all those who passed the driver's license bill because it was critical, to finding employment. In addition, provide incentives for the small businesses for immigrants, most of whom are in small businesses.
Thank you. Ms. Wojas.
Thank you. I agree with Viviane on this. I think we need to be more accepting and more tolerant of immigrants. There seems to be the feeling across this country that immigrants should be sent back to where they came from, as it were, and so a lot of times that's not possible for them. We have the refugees too. There's so many communities, so many countries around the world now that are under attack. And the residents are under attack. They need a safe place to go. And if Massachusetts or the United States in general is a place that they can come and they can feel safe, then I think we should be open to them. We should be tolerant of them. We should make every effort to provide them the resources they need in order to improve their lives.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo.
Thanks, Nancy. In preparation for tonight, I watched the 2018 League of Women Voters primary debate. And one of the main questions, and even in the opening and closing statements, the candidates were talking about the Safe Communities Act. And we still have that Safe Community Act languishing in the legislature, and it's unacceptable. So you remember Sheriff Joe of Arizona? That was a 187G agreement that was being used and then abused illegally. as a result of illegal cooperation between his department and the federal government. And that is now able to happen still in Massachusetts because we haven't passed this act. We need to make sure that our immigrant community, which are so vital to the fabric of our lives, our economy, our education here, are not living in the shadows and that they are not afraid of local law enforcement. We need to pass that act.
Thank you. The next question, and this is from our Zoom audience. In Massachusetts, water resource planning tends to be done on a very local level, town by town. Can you envision ways to enable water planning to be done on a regional basis, and what would that look like? And we'll start with Mr. Cataldo.
Thank you for that question. The question is vital right now because we are dealing with some really significant water challenges in our district. So many of you have likely heard of PFAS chemicals, which are being discovered at worrisome levels in our water supply in North Chelmsford, off of Richardson Road, in parts of Carlisle, and in North Acton in particular, and we're seeing and finding more. So we need the state governments and state agencies, regional project management expertise, because these are not town-by-town issues. Water does not stop at a town line. And we also need the resources to be brought to bear. There are other communities in Massachusetts that have gotten millions of dollars to address the PFAS issue, but not yet us, at least not to the level that we need it to be. And our next state rep needs to be vigorously advocating for that on Beacon Hill.
Ms. Birchall, water.
Regionalizing activities is one of my strengths because I did this for a living. So I know exactly how to get it done. So through my work, again, planning for our nation, we did regional programming for transportation. And so going forward for our 14th Middlesex district, one of the things I want to do is regionalize the watershed, the management of the watersheds, because it's a resource that is shared across borders. The other thing is regionalizing transportation. These are things that are easy to do because we have where to start. So it's just a matter of mobilizing the people working together, and that's where I have a plan to have functional meetings with all the different departments within the district. And going forward, I'm going to do that for many, many issues: transportation, housing, and all this, and managing water supplies.
Thank you. Ms. Borges.
Thank you. Water is definitely a strange issue to have to deal with. Many communities have a separate water district that's separate from the rest of the municipality. In fact, in Chelmsford, there are 3 water districts that are all separate from the municipality. And it's difficult for them to try to apply for and receive grants that could help them work through PFAS or anything else when they need to have a new well or other ways to purify their water. I saw in the paper today that Congresswoman Trahan was in Littleton awarding a huge amount for a PFAS water processing plant in that town. It would be terrific if we could regionalize some efforts like that. Unfortunately, sometimes water districts are very territorial. They want to do it themselves, as it were, so we should make every effort to help them. I know they have strict limits as far as how much PFAS can be in the water before they have to make pretty dramatic changes to their water takers before they allow them to continue to use that water. So it is a serious problem, and it does need to be addressed.
I think as the time winds down, we've got 3 questions here that I think we can do like one-word answers. And so we'll do a quick little lightning round. That doesn't mean they only deserve one-word answers, but maybe just to give a little break here, and then we'll go to closing statements. And I think I'll just go down the line as I see it here. So, first question, yes or no? Or maybe a little maybe if you want. Should there be legislation guaranteeing transgender athletes the ability to play on teams consistent with their gender identity? Ms. Borges.
Yes.
Mr. Cataldo.
Yes.
Ms. Birchall.
Yes.
That was easy. Do you support free public transportation?
Yes.
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 No distinguishing here. If elected, how would you commute to the State House?
Probably train.
The commuter rail.
Hybrid.
Okay, and I think we have covered just about as many questions as I've ever done in a candidates forum. You guys were just great about keeping to the time limit and being concise and answering the questions well. So we were going to go to the closing statements, 1-minute closing statements from each of you, and in the reverse order from the way we started. So Ms. Wojas, your closing statement first.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. You're an excellent moderator. You phrased the questions such that they were not easy to answer, but they were clear, so we knew how to answer them. And thanks again to the various leagues for sponsoring this and to Chelmsford Telemedia for recording it. It's right before the July 4th holiday, so as Nancy mentioned earlier, if anything happens after this date that might change anything having to do with the race, you'll have to forgive us for that. But I want to, wish everybody a happy and safe 4th of July. The election is the day after Labor Day, September 6th. So I respectfully ask for your vote. If you are not a registered Democrat, when you get to your polling location, please ask for a Democratic ballot. That's where you'll find my name, and I hope you'll mark the box next to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cataldo.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you to the three leagues of women voters who have put on this forum. Thank you to everybody who's here and everyone who's watching or will be watching. I had something else that I had prepared to say, but what I'd like to say is this. My mom died last week, and so many people who are here tonight, who are watching in this community, including the two other candidates on this stage, reached out to me to console me, put their arms around me, and support our family. I didn't think that I could love this community any more today than I did 2 weeks ago, but here we are. And I say that to say this, there are so many things that we need for great government, but the first thing that we need is good people. And in our district, we have good people, which is the main reason why I believe that we will meet this very difficult moment. My name is Simon Cataldo, and I'm asking for your vote on September 6th.
Thank you, Ms. Birchall.
I am so proud to be a resident of the 14th Middlesex. So proud to be a fellow contestant for this seat with my colleagues Simon and Pat. I am so proud to be a citizen of the United States of America as a first-generation immigrant. I'm so proud of this community for having put me on the ballot. It is a milestone. It is also a celebration of who we are as a community. It is a celebration of what we can do together if we decide, of what we can achieve when we choose to. And with that, I want to request and humbly request for your vote come September 6th in the primary. We as candidates for state rep share the similar platform as Democrats. What I bring is a life experience that you have not heard before, that is going to lift everyone, and so that we can all see ourselves in legislation. Thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you a happy 4th of July, Independence Day, America. God bless America, and God bless you all.
Thanks to all three of you for your willingness to run for office. It isn't easy, and for participating tonight. Maybe that wasn't easy either. I'm going to now turn the program back over to Nancy Comfrey to close it. First, a round of applause.
Just a couple things before you go. If you enjoyed this and want to watch it again or want to recommend it to others to watch, it has been recorded and it is available on the League websites, lwvcc.org, and also Acton, lwv-actonarea.org. It will also be available on all three towns' cable access channels. I want to remind you that the League of Women Voters is a national nonpartisan organization that has over 100 years of service providing services like this, the forum, to promote active and informed participation in government. If you enjoyed this or appreciate our work, we encourage you to go to the website to either become a member or to donate, or both. And I want to just do some quick thanks around the room today. First, for the candidates for being here, who were absolutely fabulous, again. To Nancy Brumback, our moderator extraordinaire. Chelmsford TV for both streaming this and recording it. Thank you so much. And our Zoom staff, and so you don't even know the number of people that were also supported by being able to watch this remotely, which we very much appreciate. And then all of our volunteers who have worked long and hard to make this happen. I want to recognize the core committee here: Lori Cooney, Pat Clifford, Alyssa Robinson of Acton, Mary France of Chelmsford, and Stefan Bader, Carlin Reed, and Linda Ziffrin of Concord Carlisle, and also to all of you for showing up and participating in your government. Thank you. Also, last thing, of course, September 6th, Governor Baker has signed the Votes Act. There will be unrestricted early vote, mail-in voting, and also in-person early voting available. Check your town's websites closer to the time of the election, just to make sure how all of that is going to work. And vote. Thanks.